He never took Rome, he never took Constantinople, he never won a single campaign that permanently added a Roman province to his own map. And yet for nearly 20 years, Attila the Hun had both halves of the Roman world reaching into their treasuries with shaking hands, and there is a very good argument that no outsider in all of antiquity ever did more damage to Rome from the outside. That's the puzzle I want to walk you through, because the weapon he used was not really the horse, and it was not really the bow. It was something the Romans handed him themselves, year after year, in writing. A riverbank in the Balkans in the year 435. A Roman delegation arrives at the town of Margus on the Danube to settle terms with two brothers who now lead the Huns. And the Roman envoys are not offered chairs. There is no hall, no table, no wine. The Huns stay in the saddle, and so, in their good travelling cloaks, do the Romans, a whole imperial embassy conducting international law from horseback because the other side simply will not get down. I've always loved that image, and not because it's funny. It's the entire relationship in one scene. Rome was used to setting the terms and the furniture. Here it did neither. The terms agreed that day were humiliating. Runaways who had fled Hun rule were to be handed back. Roman markets were to be opened to Hun traders. And the annual payment Constantinople made to keep the peace was doubled to 700 Roman pounds of gold every year indefinitely. Rome had a polite word for this: subsidy. Everyone involved knew the accurate word was tribute. The people extracting it had arrived in Europe barely 2 generations earlier, and nobody could tell the Romans much about where from. Their horsemen came out of the steppe grasslands north of the Black Sea in the late 300s, and their arrival set off something like a chain reaction. Goths and other peoples pushed west and south over the Danube and into the empire, because whatever was behind them was worse. Their advantage was a piece of engineering. The Hun composite bow was built from layers of wood, animal horn and sinew, glued and bound, and left to cure for a long time. Some reconstructions suggest a year or more of drying before a bow was fit to draw. It was short enough to use at a gallop, and it hit far harder than its size suggested. Roman infantry was drilled to hold a line against horsemen who could shower a formation from beyond its reach and then simply not be there. Holding a line is not a plan. It is a target. The Roman soldier and writer Ammianus Marcellinus, who saw the panic they caused, claimed they practically lived on horseback, eating there, trading there, even sleeping there. He was exaggerating, and he was writing about a people he found frightening and alien. But the exaggeration is itself the evidence. Something had come out of the grass that Roman categories could not hold, and the damage started before Attila was born. It was Hun pressure that pushed the Goths over the Danube in the 370s, and it was those Goths who, 2 years later, destroyed an Eastern Roman army and its emperor at Adrianople. Rome had already been badly wounded by the Huns without a single Hun being present. One of those two brothers on horseback at Margus was Attila. The other was Bleda. They ruled together for around a decade, and by about 445, Bleda was no longer part of the story. The sources are thin and awkward on exactly how, and I'd be inventing if I told you I knew. From that point, one man held everything from the Rhine to the steppe. He also had a story about himself, and he told it well. Word went round that an old iron sword had been turned up in a field by a herdsman and brought to him, and that it was the very war sword of the god the Romans called Mars. Whether Attila believed that is anyone's guess. That his Germanic subject peoples believed it is the part that mattered. The payments from Margus soon stopped arriving on time, and in 441 he came across the Danube to collect. What happened next surprised everyone, because horse archers are not supposed to be able to take cities. At Naissus, modern Niš in Serbia, the Huns rolled up battering rams and siege towers and broke the place open. Belgrade fell. Sofia fell. In 443, the campaign resumed and swept east through Plovdiv, and a Roman field army was broken outside Constantinople itself. Theodosius II gave up. The treaty his official Anatolius negotiated is one of the most punishing documents ever signed by a Roman emperor. 6,000 pounds of gold immediately to cover the arrears, and the annual payment tripled from 700 to 2,100 pounds of gold every single year. Sit with what that actually means. Gold in that quantity does not simply appear in a budget. Senators were assessed. Reserves were emptied. Contemporary accounts describe men of rank selling their wives' jewelry and their furniture to meet the demand, and some ruined outright by it. An empire was being drained to buy the goodwill of a man who kept sending the bill back marked higher. And here is where I'll plant my own flag. Attila's genius was never really military. It was extortionate. He worked out that a rich, frightened, bureaucratic state will always prefer to pay than to fight, and that once it has paid you once, it has told you exactly what it is worth. If you think that makes him the most modern-minded figure of the entire ancient world, hit the like and stand there with me. And if you think that's far too generous, that he was simply a very effective raider who got lucky with a weak emperor, then take me apart in the comments, because that is a fair fight, and I would enjoy it. Either way, the money kept moving north. The gold bought Constantinople several quiet years. Then Attila came back in 447 for the largest Balkan campaign of his life, broke another Roman army on the river Utus in what is now Bulgaria, and swept south through Greece as far as the pass at Thermopylae. Later accounts claim something like 70 towns and cities were taken in that one campaign. Even allowing for the usual ancient inflation, the Balkan provinces did not recover for generations. And then the ground moved. That same year, an earthquake tore through Constantinople and brought down long stretches of the great land walls along with dozens of towers, the one defense that had made the eastern capital effectively untouchable. Attila was in the Balkans. He was coming, and the city was suddenly open. What Constantinople did next is, for my money, one of the finest emergency responses in the whole of ancient history. The Praetorian prefect, a man named Constantine, turned to the only organizations in the city capable of mobilizing huge numbers of people at speed. The supporters' factions of the chariot races, the Blues and the Greens, rival mobs who spent most of their lives loathing each other in the hippodrome. He gave each faction a section of wall and let them race. 16,000 of them turned out. The Blues took the northern stretch, the Greens the southern, and in about 60 days the walls were standing again and the ditch was cleared. Football supporters essentially rebuilt the defences of a superpower in 2 months because someone was clever enough to make it a competition. Go to Istanbul today and you can still walk beside those walls. I have, and the thing that stays with you is the sheer height of them and the knowledge that they held for another 1,000 years. Attila arrived, looked at them, and did what he always did when a problem could not be shot at. He negotiated a bigger payment, took a strip of Roman territory south of the Danube, and went home. Which brings us to the single best surviving eyewitness account of any barbarian court in antiquity, and to a Roman embassy carrying a secret so dangerous that most of its own members did not know it. In 449, Constantinople sent envoys north. Officially, they were there to discuss deserters and terms. Unofficially, the emperor's chief eunuch, Chrysaphius, had bribed one of Attila's own trusted men, Edeco, with £50 of gold to remove Attila permanently. Travelling with the embassy, and completely in the dark about the plot, was a Thracian scholar named Priscus of Panium, which is why we have any of this at all. Edecco told Attila everything before the Romans had even arrived. Picture the position those envoys were in. They ride into a city of tents surrounding a hilltop compound of polished timber, escorted by men who know precisely what their emperor has just tried to arrange, and nobody tells them. Priscus recorded it all. The wooden palace with its towers and palisade, the floor of the Queen's Hall covered in woven rugs, the food, the singers, the two jesters who made the whole hall laugh. He also gave us the only physical description of Attila we have. Short, broad-chested, with a large head, deep-set eyes, a flat nose, and a thin beard. But it is one detail from that banquet that I have never been able to shake. Every guest was served on Roman silver, heaped with delicacies, and given a fine cup. Attila ate meat off a plain wooden plate and drank from a plain wooden cup. The richest extortionist in the world, sitting in the middle of gold he had personally squeezed out of two empires, deliberately eating off wood. I've turned that over for years, and I still can't decide whether it's the most sincere thing about him or the most calculated. If you've got a read on it, I'd love to see your verdict below. Attila did not punish the embassy. He sent it home with a message for the emperor that amounted to a shrug and a demand for more. And by then, his attention had already begun to drift west. It drifted because of a ring. In 450, Justa Honoria, sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian III, was being pushed into a marriage she had no interest in. She sent a servant to Attila with a plea for help, and as proof the message was really from her own ring. She almost certainly meant it as a rescue. Attila chose to read it as a proposal. He announced he would accept the lady's hand, and named her dowry, half of the Western Roman Empire. As counter-offers go, that one takes some beating. Valentinian refused, obviously. Attila now had exactly what he wanted, which was a legal-sounding excuse to cross the Rhine. Early in 451, he came into Gaul with a coalition army of Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids and others. Modern estimates put it somewhere between 50 and 100,000, and the ancient figures are useless. Metz was taken in April. Cities across eastern Gaul were stripped. By early summer, he was besieging Orléans on the Loire, and Roman Gaul was days from folding. The man who stopped him is one of history's great ironies. Flavius Aetius, the last real soldier of the Western Empire, had spent years of his own boyhood living among the Huns as a hostage. He knew their language, their commanders, their tactics, and their habits from the inside, and he had used Hun mercenaries in his own campaigns for decades. Rome's best hope against Attila was a man the Huns themselves had raised. Aetius did the one thing nobody expected. He went to the Visigoths, recent enemies of Rome, holding southern Gaul from Toulouse, and persuaded their old king, Theodoric I, that Attila was worse than Rome. That alliance should not have happened. It did. They reached Orléans in time to break the siege, and on the 20th of June, 451, the two armies met on open ground in the Champagne country, somewhere between Troyes and Chalons, the Catalaunian Plains. Jordanes, writing a century later, put the losses at 165,000, which is nonsense, but the scale genuinely shocked contemporaries. Aetius made one decision on that field that tells you everything about the coalition he had assembled. He put the Alans, allies he did not entirely trust, in the very centre where Attila's Huns would hit hardest, with his Romans on one wing and the Goths on the other. If the Alans broke, they broke inward, between two forces that could close on the gap. He was fighting a battle and managing a treaty at the same time. There is a ridge on that ground, and both sides go for it. Aetius takes it. Theodoric leads the Gothic charge and does not survive the day. and his own men, half mad with grief, drive straight into the Hun centre. By nightfall, Attila had pulled back to his wagon circle. He had been stopped. It was the first time in his life. Here is the part the schoolbooks tend to skip. Aetius let him go. His Gothic allies went home to sort out their succession, and the moment they did, Aetius no longer had an army capable of finishing the job, and, some historians argue, no interest in destroying the very people who made him indispensable. Wallow in that for a second. The man who saved the West may have deliberately preserved the threat that justified his own existence. Attila crossed back over the Rhine, and everyone assumed the storm had passed. It had not. In 452, he came over the Alps into Italy. He went first for Aquileia, at the head of the Adriatic, a wealthy fortress city that had held out against sieges before. It held for 3 months. A legend preserved by Jordanes says Attila was on the point of giving up when he noticed storks carrying their young out of the towers and away, took it as an omen that the walls were about to fall, and ordered one more assault. The walls came down. Aquileia never came back. It vanished so completely from the map that later travelers could not identify the site. The people who got out ran east into the shallow lagoons and mudflats where nobody would follow, and settled on the islands. Their descendants built Venice. Every time you see a photograph of the Grand Canal, you are looking at the long echo of a very bad summer in 452. Padua went, Milan and Pavia went, and with northern Italy open and Rome itself only weeks away, the fear in the south was not abstract. Rome had been entered and stripped by Alaric and his Goths just 42 years earlier. There were people still alive who remembered it, who had been children in that city when the gates gave way. They knew exactly what was coming down the road toward them, and they knew nobody was going to stop it. Attila stopped anyway, and this is where the most famous painting in the story gets things a little too tidy. A Western embassy met him near the river Mincio, close to Mantua. It included the prefect Trigetius, the former consul Avienus, and the Bishop of Rome, Leo I. They talked. Attila turned around and left Italy. Christian tradition made that meeting a miracle, and it is a wonderful image, an unarmed old man in a river meadow turning back the terror of the world. The truth is more crowded. Northern Italy was already in famine from the failed harvest of the previous year. Illness was moving through the Hun camp, and the Eastern Emperor Marcian had just sent an army across the Danube to strike Attila's homeland while he was away. The embassy gave him a dignified reason to do what supply and disease had already decided for him. It was very good timing, and Leo took the credit for 15 centuries. He went back to his heartland in Hungary, meaning to turn east again in the spring because Marcian had stopped paying. Then, in 453, Attila took a new bride, a young woman remembered as Ildiko, and the wedding celebrations ran long into the night. In the morning, his men waited outside the chamber and heard nothing. When they finally forced their way in, they found the girl weeping behind her veil, and Attila gone. There was no wound, no enemy. Something inside him had simply given way while he slept, in the quietest possible end for the loudest man alive. He was probably in his late 40s. The story of what followed is legend, and I'll flag it as legend, though it comes from Jordanes, and it is the version everybody knows. They laid him in 3 coffins, one inside the next, iron, then silver, then gold. They turned a river aside, made the grave in the dry bed, and let the water back over it. And the men who did the work were never allowed to carry the secret home. No one has ever found him. What happened to the empire he built is the most telling thing of all. His sons could not agree. The subject peoples rose, and at the river Nedao in 454, a single year later, the Hunnic Confederation came apart in one battle. Within about 2 decades, it had gone from the map entirely. It had no cities, no bureaucracy, no succession law, no institutions. It was one enormous personality, and personalities are not inheritable. The Western Empire outlived him by 23 years. Aetius, who had stopped him, was gone within a year of Attila himself, taken down inside his own court by the emperor he had spent his life defending, which prompted the famous Roman line that Valentinian had used his left hand to cut off his right. And Attila? He walked out of history and straight into poetry. He turns up as Etzel in the German Nibelungenlied and as Atli in the Norse sagas, and in both he is a king in a hall, not a monster on a horse. It was Christian writers of the West who gave him the title we still reach for, the Scourge of God, the punishment sent to a sinful empire. That framing tells you far more about how Rome understood its own decline than it ever did about him. In Hungary and in Turkey, the name is still given to sons with pride to this day. 1600 years on, here is what I think he really proved, and it has nothing to do with horses. An empire is only as strong as its willingness to be inconvenienced. Rome could raise armies. What it could not do, again and again, was choose a hard year over a written check. And Attila read that in Roman faces at a riverbank in 435 and never once misread it afterwards. If you rode all the way to the end of this one with me, come along for the next. Subscribe here to Mystique History and put in the comments which vanished people, which lost frontier, which name that only survives in somebody else's chronicle you'd like me to go looking for. I read them all, and they genuinely decide where I point the torch next. He built nothing, wrote nothing, left no city and no grave. And still, 16 centuries later, Rome is a ruin, the Huns are a rumor, and everyone alive still knows his name.